Okay. So, taking an history dip into the early-ish 90s into and looking at trades while waiting for others um, from Over the Edge. Before Over the Edge, there were several concepts of how to define a character or a role in our terms, like and you know about like how games like Dungeons and Dragons have these abilities, and of course nowadays computer games as well have like abilities, which is like strength, uh,
Yes.
constitution, etc. And quite quickly, I think, sort of from the beginning, even pre D&D, but I don't open the can of worm of history. There was another uh, end of the spectrum, which is roughly skills.
Mm.
So skill could be something like like lock picking, and
Yeah.
like uh, and quite soon early. I think by Traveler, certainly by Call of Cthulhu, like uh, there became a kind of like a slight, uh, slightly different version of the skill, which is kind of vocation. Like a
Mm.
doctor or uh, and kind of like also knowledge skills like psychology, things like that. But these were just words, and maybe there was a description somewhere, but that was kind of like how like a general description. And to open up a bit, not too deeply, but I think it's useful to also bring in like why there were abilities and why there came the skills, and is that there is a kind of usefulness to abilities, which is like the idea of abilities is like they're somehow applicable to every situation. Like
Mm-hmm.
that was the kind of attempt of them, is like whatever the situation, you can think like, should I think of this in the perspective of strength or intelligence or dexterity or like, but the idea was that whatever the situation, you can think of at least one of them that applies. But then the problem was that, well, the early games were fantasy in this sense, but when you come to the real world, it's kind of limited. Like, if whether you're doing psychology or physics, going all by intelligence is kind of like fussing the ballpark too much.
Mm.
So the skill end was like that. Okay, this is not applicable to every situation. So the skills is, and you're not having all the skills while you're having all the abilities. But the idea is that you have this huge pool, and then you can select like a palette from them. Is okay. I have psychology, and I have woodworking, and whatever. And so these kind of created this sort of like a, not always, but often this sort of mutual existence, like they're serving different needs. And why I'm saying all this, because I think this is actually highly relevant to think about these kind of like functional concepts or building game elements for organizations, like and the work done into this direction was is actually still highly useful. But then coming to Over the Edge, so Over the Edge did a little things a little bit differently. Like it actually kind of like scrunch both of those approaches together, coming up
Mm-hmm.
with this idea of traits. And trait is a little bit like a skill, but it's also a little bit like an ability. But in combination, it does something different. So here's an example of a trait, which is sort of like could be kind of like an ability. But a couple of key things to say here. This description is supposed to be potentially written by you. So if you have the trait intelligent, you can use this text, but you don't have to.
Mm-hmm.
And then actually, you probably shouldn't. You should change it a bit because your intelligence is different from others' intelligence. Also, the title intelligence is not a pre-selection, it's an example. The
Mm.
title could be a zombie taxi driver,
Okay.
or my other example, the wrong, is the photographer here.
Okay.
But they can be weird ones, etc., like anything. And but the idea here is that this is all kind of play material. Um, um, okay, now it works. So 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 you're supposed to write something this short. You're supposed to write this beginning text and also the text in the brackets because they serve different roles.
Mm.
And it's supposed to be this short because you're supposed to be able to check this on play, uh, and kind of like quickly or remember generally what's in there. So so in this case, this personal take of intelligence defines like putting clues together to form a valid hypothesis, understanding the meanings of obscure names and words, impressing similarly intelligent and erudite people. Now, but you could put like has uh, extremely high book knowledge, knows where to find a book, uh, can always kind of get something useful out of even a local library,
Yeah.
and that could be called book smart, and
Mm-hmm.
that would be uh, potentially what you make. Then in the text in the brackets is kind of like almost like physical mottos, like things that people see you doing, but also like kind of give examples of what kind of things you do in the world. Like here, it's like does crosswords rapidly and in pen uses big words. But this could be, for the book smart as like um, uh, uses a lot of fancy quotes, always knows a reference,
Yeah.
things like this. So, so what I find interesting in this trait is it's different from a move. It's not really a right. It's more like it's kind of validating that you more know something or are something, you're able of something rather than you can do the specific thing. But it's similarly functional. It's very much like, okay, what kind of areas should we think about for this? And I think it's an interesting format to bring about because it's sort of semi-forgotten, like this particular approach. And while many things have kind of traced from it, I think it, like I said, it does some things that other things don't do.
Yeah.
But I don't know. What's your thoughts? I talked long enough.
Yeah, I'm curious about, I don't know if this is just for this example, but there's like an emphasis on socially what does it mean to
Mm,
possess this trait? Like
yes,
how people
good
see
catch.
you and interact with you.
Yes,
Like impressing similarly intelligent and erudite people, right? Like that
yeah,
is interesting to me that it's already in the trait how others might relate to you.
yeah. That's actually a really good catch. Yeah, sorry, my video has still this problem, so I'll reboot it. But I'm here. I can. So, but good catch because um, there's a really good game designer behind this, Jonathan Tweed, and if I would have all the traits, you would notice the same qualities. And of course, the social aspect is there because it's like group of characters. So you're going to put kind of social things in there because those are broadly applicable in general. Like how do you function in the world? Of course, you could put other emphasis because this is really now like uh, like uh, um, like a thing that you can have personality how you make them and style. But here, like it's very much these are actually quite well designed. I could have more examples, like how they're written and what they think about it. I also like it. It's like if you compare this to definition of intelligence in a dictionary,
Hmm.
like of course, like this is not meant to be general in the same sense, but it's also like has this sort of interesting knack of how it kind of defines things. Like how do you want to define it, but also like how do you want to put something that you think is sort of more general, applicable to many more situations, and sort of more special to you, and how do you kind of combine them, which makes it kind of like I think interesting in this sense that it becomes this sort of like how do I what's my style of creating this thing.
Yeah. Also, I mean, all of this, the way you write these things, because it happens in the context of a game, this is already part of the world building, right? Like
Yes.
saying those crosswords rapidly and in pen uses
Yeah.
big words. That's already
Yeah.
like, it already creates an image in my head of recklessly using a pen to do a crosswords, right? I would never dare to do such a thing.
Yeah. Like I think I think it's from the game itself, but I'm putting a caveat on it. I might have made the example myself because it's a
Mm,
long time, but the zombie taxi driver example, because I remember a description of a trait called zombie taxi driver, and it might be in the first edition. But the idea is like it has like knows the map of the city. The game actually takes place in one imaginary city, but knows the streets of the city by hand, always finds shortcuts, is really good with a car, but then also cannot die, like or is unkillable, and like, but even the name itself gives you a lot in the sense of like you can incorporate everything you know about zombies, but then you can kind of condition that a bit by the description, like this kind of a zombie. But then you know also a lot about taxi drivers,
yeah,
like, and then you can think even outside of the text is like, okay, like we're thinking this and this kind of thing. What kind of things taxi drivers would know about this? Or you're being dropped from a height. What happens to a zombie when they're dropped from a height? So with 3 lines and this, you get quite a lot, and you can kind of do more with the description itself. And and one interesting thing about this also is that in the game, I think the idea is that you have three. So because the problem with skills was that you could easily have 20 to
yeah,
make a real character. And that becomes like too large. Like you almost like forget, oh, I had that skill, and so on. Uh, and then the problem with abilities was that they're too general. But these,
mm,
because they pack a lot, um, uh, that you can work with these three, then even though they're deeper and you kind of want to work with the description as well, but you can kind of keep it in mind. So all in all, unsurprising from a really good game designer, but this is really good game design. But then it goes to that's really good behavioral mechanics design also for organizations, like having something that, oh, you remember the titles. After remembering the titles, you sort of remember what's there, and then you can easily kind of think about it, and also others can remember your traits.
yeah. Do you think it's good design because it allows to add a lot of depth with a few points instead of having 20 skills, you have three traits that sort of pack more stuff into them?
It's both like so there's this sort of general rule of thumb is that, like, for example, why, for example, D&D has 6 abilities, or why most of the games kind of coordinate to similar amounts. Like some have more, but is that, I mean, there is this sort of true rule that humans can keep 7 things in their mind,
Hmm.
but if you put 7 things that you have to equally remember, that's already too much because something else is going on in your mind as well. Like in a way, even 6 is kind of too much. Um, so 3 or 4 is a good standard. And then the way to bypass this limit is to make it by steps or branchings. So you
Mm.
have 3 or 4 things, but then those 3 or 4 things contain other things. And that helps the human mind to still navigate. Like I remember the 3 things, but once I think about one of them, I can then have things inside of it.
Yeah.
And so uh, so that's the key thing, because and it comes in the sense that the skills were approached like that. In say skill of psychology, there would be just general description for psychology, and that would be applicable for everyone. That would not be changed. But then the idea is that when you tailor the trait, you actually make it kind of much more fitting for the role that you're utilizing, and therefore it's much more useful, and it has more meat for interpretation and uh, affect and whatever.
Yeah, it has more of a nested quality. You can put things inside.
Yeah. Uh, so I don't think Jonathan Tweed says this in the game, but I'm sure that he's aware about this sort of limit, and I'm sure he went for 3 um, precisely in order to have like not too many. Um, like he's a really he's made actually he made a couple of really interesting games in the 90s. He's already, I think, quite old now, but like um uh, there's a game called Everway, which is also highly influential and highly unknown, and and then he ended up actually redesigning Dungeons and Dragons in the 3rd edition, like from weird roots, and made a generally better edition. But that was maybe less interesting than his more kind of experimental design. So, uh, but yeah, but I'm thinking like this trait. Well, my question actually also like practically, if you think about practically using this, what kind of things come to your mind? Like, yeah,
In an organization, you mean? In the
yeah,
context of
yeah,
organization?
yeah. As a kind of spitballing brainstorming thing.
Yeah, yeah, I feel it's quite effective into synthesizing sort of like what people can offer
Mm,
in the organization context.
mm,
Um, yeah, and like piling up maybe 2 or 3 characteristic into one single trait, which I
mm,
find interesting.
yeah,
Yeah, like instead of being just like, yeah, a designer, you can be sort of like the trait is visual intelligence or pattern recognition, and
mhm,
inside of that you can pack a couple of interesting things.
yeah. Um, I'm also thinking. Uh, so in this game, in the Over the Edge, these traits are only for characters, i.e., roles. Um, but nothing prevents, like looking at this usability of thinking similar things for scenes or whatever. Like, it's like a similar approach, like um, um, uh, and they could even have um, uh, like in the title you could have even a category. So let me make an example. We have a scene and there is a category atmosphere,
Mm.
and then the atmosphere is what's the word? I just lost it. It's like um, inquisitive, like like making question, like
Mm-hmm.
uh, not questioning in a critical sense, but kind of like finding questions. Not inquisition, but
Yes.
same root. And then you have a description like this. So you have now the category atmosphere, and then you had like the title could be inquisitive and something else, and then you would have a description like this. And I think the idea of having this sort of almost like physical motto slogans as well, like and then you add that to a scene, and you might have probably would have in addition like rules etc. for the scene as well. But this could be there as a way to kind of set this like, okay, approach it like this, like I'll try to get to this kind of atmosphere, and essentially. So that's or what do you think about that kind of approach?
Yeah, that kind of very explicitly sets a tone that is clear to navigate.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
then you can tune it also, like changing the description, etc., and so on. So yeah, I think it's an interesting possibility, and kind of like a well interesting mechanic, which which I was thinking like um, it would be good to bring back because
yeah,
like it's a very like it's complementary to things like moves, things like rule like things, etc. Like um, because it's doing its own thing, um, in addition to them.
yeah. I'm also curious. Like I'm thinking, if the scene is inquisitive, it has the trait of being inquisitive. And this trait is also transferable to a character or a role.
Mhm.
It's interesting to think how things stack. What if I have the inquisitive trait and I find myself in an inquisitive atmosphere? How does those
Mm.
two traits stack?
Uh, yeah, that's a good question. Like, of course, they could have slightly different descriptions, but also if they have the same description, it could potentially strengthen it, or just be harmonic, like that it fits, like it's resonant. Like you could use mechanics like uh, if it's the scene is inquisitive, you could at least select the people who have inquisitive or something similar as a trait into the scene, or things like this would become possible.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
but it's interesting to think if those stacking traits act as a multiplier or as a resonance, or maybe even they are subtracting in some way. Maybe you lose your trait if you find your like it's an equalizing, and now we are all inquisitive, and your trait is no longer a defining characteristic, right? Yeah,
yeah, yeah, could also be like one can always use kind of temporal control or condition control, like you lose it in these kind of situations, or a scene starts as inquisitive but then kind of drops that trait when something happens, when an idea is on the table or things like
yeah.
this, and
Maybe it's
adds
just
another.
an inquisitive fog that appears and disappears, comes
Yeah,
and goes.
yeah, yeah. This is another example. I probably should have cut more, but like a photographer. But once again, like rather than having dictionary description, it has first like perceptive, which is generally applicable. That okay, you're a photographer, you're likely to notice things, and look around. But then probably people actually overread it. Hello, Jakub. I'll feed you in soon. I'll just finish this comment. Like they don't actually read just the word perceptive, but they read like perceptive like a photographer. Like they notice details. Like if you ask from them, like, what was that building like?
Yeah,
Well, the photographer is like, well, it had like white walls and it had this and so on. And 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 then like well, this is 90s, so can develop own film, which is maybe not true today, but then may have connections to in the publishing industry. Um, like as a definition, everything here is about like what is applicable to situations. So for Jakub, so while we're waiting for you, we kind of as a transition started kind of uh, looking around this particular mechanic concept that I dug around from the 90s, which is called trait, which is highly influential for things like moves, etc., but it's different. And I explained it. It's on video because for once I was smart enough to start the video early enough. So there's like a rundown from the very beginning of the video. But like as a short form, the trait um, is like a different mechanic than say ability or skill. I'll summarize really quickly. Like that the idea is that you kind of make it yourself. Like here, it's a photographer as an example, but it could be like a fashion photographer, or it could be like a punk photographer, etc., um, or anything else. And then the description is meant to be written by you, and the idea is it's actually playable material, like that. Here it says perceptive, like just as talked about when we were coming in, like that becomes this sort of like a quality of play. And then the things in brackets that carries camera everywhere are kind of like physical mottos or something like that. Like the idea is like that they are habits, maybe is a good thing, a good way of thinking about it. That they kind of, you put there something that is like a habit like thing that you have. Um, so so the trait is kind of like a slightly lost approach, and I was introducing it to Pablo to, and we had some good conversation about it, and we were just kind of getting it to its applicability, which we might kind of like still slightly round down before we move to more larger topics or the other topics. But so, but hopefully that can bring you in, Jakub, in terms of where we were. You're muted somehow, or mic is not working. I'm hearing something, but like not much.
Let me
Now,
see.
There, yep.
Uh, a moment, I will just put my. Uh, is it better now?
yeah, now we can.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I was just saying that thanks and sorry for coming late.
No, it's okay. Yeah, because like we had Martin is not coming and Thea is coming next week, but not this week, and so we're probably on a low um, group, and hopefully also a new member called Mikael is joining next week. He's joining anyway, but he's threatening to come possibly next week. He's a really interesting, smart guy from Finland. But yeah, like uh, but in terms of the kind of usability of these trades, Pablo, do you have anything to add, or even Jacobi, if you have like first impression thoughts?
I not much. I would just say it's like this actionable characteristic
Yeah.
that packs yeah, skills, abilities into a, yeah, into this package that also conveys. We mentioned how others relate to you, and it has some world building capacity in a way.
And scene building. Yeah,
Scene building, yeah, as well.
yeah, because scene building is kind of like a micro world building, and that's the interesting sharing point between those two things, because that means that you can import a lot that comes from world building, which has a lot of techniques in itself, like a um, and for Jakob also, one topic mentioned that the traits, even though they were originally made for kind of roles, you can also think about them for scenes. Um, and and I think the format could be slightly developed. I think it's already good, but like you could have a category, like the example of like a trait for a scene that is atmosphere inquisitive, like quizzical or making questions, and then this kind of description, and then you put it on a scene, so it becomes this sort of like a, oh, we read this and we get this general gist of what is wanted, and after that there's some rules, but it communicates differently than say rule you must do this or things like that. Yeah, I think it's good to incorporate it as a potentially an aspect, and it certainly does something different than moves, and I think it's uh, an interesting way to look at definition in game terms compared to dictionary definition of a thing, um, and the fact that it's creative, that you write your own, then it becomes a style question, etc. That also kind of fits. But yeah, so I'll reboot my video again. It's down again. And there's sun. Just get rid of the most, or at least try to get rid of the most problematic sun. Okay, uh, so today, like, Jakub, what did you think of the description topics?
Yeah, you mean now regarding the trade or the topics in the session description?
I was thinking of the session, but if you have something on the trades, that's welcome to kind of
Yeah.
close out the topic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find it really interesting or useful, and yeah, I think I will need a bit more time to kind of integrate and settle down into and relate it to the other terms. But yeah, I find it useful. And in terms of the session topic, yeah, I was watching the last session, well, the rest of it where I was missing. So yeah, I think that's I'm happy with yeah, if this is the direction.
Yeah, it ended up actually quite well, especially also. Uh, uh, I think kind of it was good that kind of Martin also found this connection between the real thing he's doing and then like how it could apply. So that's, but it like I was saying in the beginning when Pablo was here, that I think it leads to this topic of that we have other potential cases. I think of your direction, like the digital implementation, that is a sort of a case as well as Martin's case. It's uh, like it's a little bit different quality, but it can certainly be treated as such. And then there's a couple of others. There is Felix has a case, and then for his event, and then there's a couple of candidates also as well. So I don't like I we can approach this kind of case by case, whatever is kind of in the interest and what is like a smaller group and a separate group, whatever. But I think it's good to kind of evaluate like what kind of things could enter into general discussion and be helpful for that. Um, um, because I think there is like a two birds with one stone kind of situation with these kind of things, which is like a say this leads to developing something for Martin's, well, not just an event, but a place, like a more persistent thing. Then that becomes like a place that name recognition, like presence somewhere, things like this. And I'm thinking like everything should be kind of like attributed as XORG, and I'm like I think we can always mention also names of people who worked on it, because I think generally it's like in the problematic of currently like who gets credit, the easiest solution is like the win-win is that you credit always like a collective, if the collective is present, to bring this sort of sense of togetherness, but also like you can always credit without losing anything, like people who, and then people also feel that they are recognized, like yeah. but that's a sort of little bit of a practical side note.
Yeah.
But in terms,
Mhm.
do say,
Yeah, I was also like in terms of kind of the practical cases, or like perhaps the smaller subgroups related to kind of the software thingy. So there's already kind of a group of people kind of coalescing around that would be up for, let's say, more like more continuous or more regular meetings around that. And so I
yeah,
was thinking like how to find an optimal way how to kind of interact with this group and perhaps this group, or how to find a good way to interface this, because I think that it and also it's kind of a like two birds or three birds with one stone possibly, because I think like one layer is okay, like implementing some more general, let's say, interface or grammar which allows to, let's say, visualize or express some of the concepts we are speaking about. But also another layer would be that it can be useful to already start playing with some like real case when visualize something perhaps. So yeah, so I guess it's kind of intertwining possibly, but yeah, this is kind of a question which is a question mark which is hanging in my head a little bit, like how to find a beneficial way and enjoyable way how to perhaps kind of go about this subgroup or initiative or however we want to call it. Yeah, and I would be happy for any inputs or ideas.
we could even kind of dedicate like a little bit of time now for that, because I mean it's about planning playtesting, but one of the things is about this sort of what to do with cases. And uh, is that okay with you, Pablo, that we would think about or what to do with what would be like good approaches towards this sort of digital? Okay, like
totally. I'm curious, what group is this, Jakub? Is this the Promise Theory group? Is this
yeah, so it's kind of a amorphous group, because I've been like sending out the HackMD document to various people, and so some of them have written their name on the document, but some of them haven't yet. But there's this kind of this clump of potential interested people who expressed some specific ways they would like to engage. For example, I don't know, someone who would like to look more into finding creative ways how to visualize something. Some of them would be more like in the let's say coding part. So I was thinking that perhaps it might be a good time in the near future to actually dedicate some Discord channel or some space like that to that, and to actually make some official get to know each other, I don't know, meeting and chatting or something like that. Yeah.
So it's the Bevy HackMD.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
I guess I'm part of this group as well.
Yes,
actually.
definitely.
That's always good. More ties.
Yeah.
But I think having a session, even like a branching session, like of its own, doesn't have to be the normal general time. I think it's always a good idea, because it kind of can motivate people. Like, oh, this could be happening, so I'll dedicate some thought into this kind of things. And in terms of the approach, well, oh, Axel is joining. Hello, Axel.
Hello.
Welcome joining. You came just at a good moment, actually. Well, everything is a good moment, but you came at the kind of start of a topic, which is we're thinking about uh, like potential playtesting approaches, but then currently the topic is how do we approach like incorporating real cases? And we have a case here, which is Jakub has brought this digital spectrum. I kind of briefly mentioned this to you, which is like the game engine or game development engine.
I'm just sharing perhaps for Excel the HackMD link.
Yeah,
Thanks.
yeah, like, and I can give you the link also in Telegram later, like that you can read it at good time. But which is an interesting case, and there's actually some people, amorphous group, potentially interested developing it, including programmers and other kinds of people. So we were just about kind of talking about, okay, let's take this case and talk about how do we approach it a bit. And that's kind of where we were. Oh, or are you, there's Jonathan Biller, which is like
yeah, no worries, no worries. I was just messaging him, but
oh,
it's fine.
oh, you were thinking, yeah, okay. Anyway, like
I just ordered the book, but yeah, no, sorry.
yeah. So
I was just saying, Jonathan, that I in fact would like to hear what you were saying. Like maybe we could start half an hour later.
all right, okay, yeah, good. So towards this,
we can go elsewhere.
Yeah, no, but that's fine to hear it, because like I think this particular topic will be shortish, so it will be a good package because we have to talk about this playtesting in general. But hello, Jonathan. So welcome to surprise. You found yourself in a meeting and probably have to move in a moment, but there, yeah, we'll have a moment of sharing a particular topic. So how to approach this?
Wait, do you want me here? I'm sorry.
No, yeah, you can be here. We're talking about like developing actually a case of a particular game engine, which Jakub here in the top left corner or wherever he's on your screen has brought in with some people, and this game engine relates to some of the sort of experimental organizational techniques that have been on the table since the kind of metaverse directions and whatnot, and how to approach it. And so, yeah, the couple of things I promised to say. So first of all, super practical, which might be a surprise. I actually do have several years of digital game development, video game development experience. So in this sense, like there is something to mine there, and kind of I can bring some of that in. I used to be essentially in the role of a designer, like which is like writing game description documents and talking and fighting with programs. That's which I wasn't one. But then in terms of more practical, more kind of general practical side, I think how the case could be is to like you said, Jakub, form a kind of almost like its own development group or Discord channel, whatever, and then decide also situation by situation what could be a talking point for just for that group, and when could that group bring something to the general group, and because both can be beneficial. So I think it's good that it starts by itself and those people get interested and motivated to it. But then when it's like, hey, we have this design issue, why not talk about it with everyone? Like, and we can introduce it and so on, and really go situation by situation. And it doesn't have to be like that with all the cases, but I think that might be a good approach. I don't know, how does that sound?
Yeah, very good.
Yeah, it's a promising job for Jonathan. It's a very recent. It's actually kind of Jakub's initiative that he took some of the ideas and started hacking around with a game development engine, which is like an engine for making games, not a particular game. And also promising in this sense that it's written in Rust, which is, let's say, highly also security oriented and also functional programming language in the sense of like practically functional, like that it has a good record and is used by many, or at least several crypto projects. So whatever is written with or made with this game engine is ultimately Rust, and therefore compatible with potentially crypto projects.
Yeah,
And
sorry.
Yeah, do say.
Yeah, it was just like an addition that one of the motivations why to use Rust was because I'm playing with Holochain, and now there's libraries which would allow actually connecting the game engine directly to Holochain, so we could already play like seamlessly with plugging the game engine directly to, let's say, holochain network. So this is what I'm playing right now. So
yeah, and that's highly interesting in the kind of dark forest like projects also kind of way. But I think the kind of direction we talked about this last time is like the nature of an organization is like highly multi cross media, call it whatever. But behind the kind of bland term is that even in traditional organizations, we're in a discussion, then we go to an application to have a vote, then that vote is recorded into a document. We add something to the document, then somebody reads the document, and there's another discussion, and so on and so forth. And this is like since the beginning of organizations, and of course more intensive nowadays. So thinking of it that way, if you use something in a game engine, it can be a part, a core part, like a functioning part of an organization. It doesn't have to be like everything in it. Just like the voting is inside a coded environment, perhaps in crypto, because for that interaction that is needed, you could have a game environment and game interaction that is a particular thing that is applicable for many, many organizations. So that was
Yeah.
one of the topics we talked about last time, which also makes the projects more feasible, or kind of you can make them smaller and more focused, and kind of more experimental as well. So that's kind of where we are with this topic fairly early on.
perhaps
It's 2 weeks old.
Yeah,
Go
one
ahead.
last addition or update. So I was speaking with Shebnem Rusichka, who is doing the token
Oh,
engineering kind of
he's a cool guy.
course. Yeah, and she's also doing the ecosystem value flows course, where part of it is kind of mapping what would be like the ecosystem where the tokenomics could be somehow expressed. And one interesting idea that Shebnem mentioned was that the game environment can be an actually interesting alternative way of actually enacting or recording the possible specification for the thing. So now they were using MiroBoard and kind of platform design toolkit, where you are kind of putting the actors and using the post-it notes. But her idea was actually to experiment with a kind of game-like environment to do it in a more interactive way, this kind of process. So yeah, I just wanted to share that this was also one of the possible ideas, and Shebnem is kind of excited, perhaps even finding funding for this this like sub project. And I think she already wrote some kind of proposal on the Gitcoin or something like that. But yeah,
That's highly possible. Also good to know that the pronouns are she. This is the nature of when you know people from chats only, and you don't know the country's name. Like, is it like which direction of a name? Like like too traditionally assumed. But yeah, like that's good. But she, I know her from Telegram mostly, and so I and super active and interesting person. So that would be a good connection. Yeah. But yeah, like that's a. I think it's a really interesting direction, especially with this. Like we can really think focused. Of course, we can think more expanded cases as well, but it can potentially be something like this particular interaction. Like, but then the question is like, if you approach these interactions not just as like with a straight mindset of, oh, we need voting and we need something else, but what is the range of different interactions that could be fertile for organizations if you approach it creatively? That's kind of the ballpark you can think of. And what's the representation? Is it the 3D like space or 2D like presentation? Is it the field? Is it more like a board game? What is the interaction you can do? Um, like as a practical point for Axel and Jonathan, both 3D and 2D and any other representation is possible in this game engine. So you can like make it look and operate however you want. This. So yeah, I think it's good initiative, and we should kind of put together the meeting and maybe think about like a couple of topics to kind of bring into the meeting to get people interested. Like not necessarily we'll do exactly this, but like here's one direction and here's another potential direction. Anyway, that's my thoughts on this. And like the kind of testing development, like I said, could be like its own group, or like more generally, whichever is interesting for that. Any other comments? Anybody? Jonathan, actually included.
I'm sorry, I can't comment because I came in too late, so I'm just
No, it's okay.
absorbing. And thanks for tolerating my presence, everybody. I appreciate it.
No, I just wanted to open I wasn't kind of demanding comments, but like also kind of in an inclusive sense, saying like you don't have to be silent if you have something.
Yeah, though we should kind of I've been also watching some of the earlier session videos, kind of to have that maybe in a Google Doc, or kind of we could share there's some really good material there already.
Yeah, and it's
like a discourse is forming.
Yeah,
yeah.
And it's getting better. Like also like the last time we had a session with when Martin was here, he cannot make it today, but I think it's the baby and family. But he for Jonathan information, and actually maybe also as well, like he's an interesting person, kind of semi known in the Finnish design scene, and he, in the sense that he's currently running a design residency in Helsinki. I can't remember the exact name, but the major kind of design residency, and he wants to design how does it function in terms of the mechanics of this sort of game organization approaches. And we had made some headway at the very end of the session, like really coming to hey, this is actually a very interesting area, coming up with some approaches to it, like practically. So that's also on the table as a case now, that he wants to do it for somewhere in the fall.
Yeah, that's very good news.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. But otherwise, yeah. So the other topic we have is like how to approach other cases, and these cases in general. We expand from that, and Jonathan, actually, it's also okay if you have to go to your actual meeting. Like it's okay, jump off at any point, or stay, whichever. But yeah, any thoughts on cases in general? Like what's your feelings of like approaching more general things or approaching more cases? The balance of those things.
I think it's really nice when we have the opportunity to work with specific cases. At least, like, I don't know, like having this game environment to think organizations in, at least for me, has been very revealing of how boring are the organizations we have, no? Like, once you think of them as games, you're like, wow, we've made this horrible game that we're playing, and it's like, it's bad, right? So that's been very revealing.
Yeah.
And that's been very fun of thinking through organizations. And I think that was sort of like the revelation we had last time with Martin, was in terms of even extending to the political implications of how, when you think of traits, when you think of, I don't know, what was it that we had a really intense revelation of how you can make people accountable, right? Through a game mechanic. And that was a very nice moment. So I really like when we do specific cases, And for me, the general discussion is more like gathering the tools necessary to do that analysis.
Yeah, that's a good phrasing of it. Yeah, like I kind of agree. Also, that the general has this still the sort of practicality that it's about gathering the tools. Um, and I agree with your description that that's actually kind of how I think about it often, is that the traditional organization is a horrible game or badly designed game, and it's mostly because of the mindset. It's the kind of like it's kind of like enslaving yourself to the task, which might be okay for efficiency, but then it kind of puts you in a very narrow thinking set, like what is possible. Like so, yeah, that fits me. And
it depends so much on the posture that you have towards organization.
Yeah. And it's almost like, what do I have to do to be not quite a slave? That's maybe a too strong a term, but there's really an underling for whatever it's. And even when you don't think of yourself as an underling, it's sort of like an atmosphere present in the mindset that we have towards organizations. Like even the boss is an underling of the task, and while that can be useful, it's limiting, like in terms of what is actually enriching, especially for long-term organizations.
Yeah, even in those organizations that are supposed to be welcoming, you, when seeing through the game's framework, you might realize they're actually hostile in many ways, right? And I think that was also something we spoke with Martin last time.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
And also that how this becomes, I think Martin, I think everybody contributed, but made this like how it becomes also political, but in the sense that you can design things and they don't actually fit to the normal spectrum of political because they are so tailor-made. Like he pointed out, like one of the examples I made was kind of like okay, that's the kind of leftist take on things, or the kind of communal sense of things. But then we went to examples, but let's condition it, like if we make this kind of rule, it kind of moves a bit from there, and if we make this kind of rules, it moves again, and now it's in a kind of territory which doesn't have like a normal term in itself. Like it's neither leftist or rightist, it's not communist, it's not liberal, it's not a capitalist, etc. And I think like that's an interesting aspect of designing political connotations. Not that you even have to think of them as political, but they have this sort of sense of like of how people should be or could be in the organization. But any other thoughts on like how to approach this? In addition to Pablo's this case general balance.
Hey, sorry, I gotta go. Jonathan has such limited time, and we have specific things we need to solve today.
No, that's okay.
It was really nice to see you.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah.
Goodbye.
Yeah. Any thoughts, Jakub?
I'm sorry.
Any thoughts from you, Jakub, in terms of this balance?
Balance, you mean
between like specific cases and general sessions?
Yeah, I mean, so for me, definitely the specifics are useful and interesting, but yeah, I'm not sure if I have anything more constructive to add.
Yeah, I just wanted both of your kind of like atmospherics towards it, like like it's good to hear like that there is some interest in that, and like I said, Jakub, I like your division that it's the general is still about building tools. It just is in this more sense of like now we're not tied to any, like it can be any kind of a point of interest, but it's more towards like kind of developing essentially like because yeah, like I have nothing against it. Like I think in the beginning, like going to earlier sessions, it was also useful to kind of have a little bit more general take because of like developing a common language, or at least the start of that, like
Yes.
like defining terms and whatnot, and also kind of like what is this perspective in general, like we're talking about that. But I don't think, for example, this kind of approach takes anything away of making like more theoretical structural points. I actually find that game design and game designers are quite naturally moving between kind of theoretical thoughts and and very practical thoughts, because the the area is so structural. Like it's so much about like structure, meaning that you kind of have to do that, like to be able to jump between those things. Like have a thought that this kind of mechanic has this and this kind of effects to people, or has this kind of meaning, like also as well.
Yeah, and perhaps like the one thought that I forgot to mention related to this is that it seems to me that like this whole emerging discipline that it's kind of a practice, right? Like a set of skills and
Yes.
habits and ways of like framing, etc. And that one of the more practical parts can be sharing our experiences also. Yeah, so for example, I intend, because we are like one of the projects I'm a part of is exploring a possible like community center, partially focused on like education, partially focused on digitization here in the small town. And since I will be present at least to some capacity in like shaping the idea, so I'm thinking that this can be like really nice training or like experimenting space, even implicitly or even explicitly, like bringing those ideas in. So that this can be also perhaps a part at some point, like sharing our experiences, how we applied this thinking, or what were the feedbacks or results, something like that. So like kind of like a community of practice forming or something like that.
Yeah, like I agree. Like it's a very much a usable case, and like
and I'm sorry, I don't mean like necessarily just like this my thing, but like the kind of the the possibility that probably all of us to some extent may intentionally or less intentionally be applying it some way. So perhaps having some spaces within the conversations to just like blurt out those things that could be nice too.
Yeah,
Yes.
agreed.
Yeah, for example, I would find a lot of value if we are able to, at least in some way, generalize what we've learned to do analysis of either of already existing organizations, like reverse engineer an organization with the games framework to reveal some of its characteristics, or to play test an organization into being through games themselves, right? Like a game to create an organization that functions in a game-like sense, or a game to dissect an organization that already exists. And maybe this can help us go back and forth between the general and the particular. Just a thought.
I think like this is a good overlap with Martin's case, because that's kind of essentially the topic he wants to create, like to generate an organization, or at least parts of an organization, and how it functions by game mechanics. So I mean, we can talk with him, but I think that that kind of direction could easily kind of overlap with that particular case. In terms of analyzing organizations, actually, I think that was one of the key points also that brought about the conversation at the end of the last session, because we started when he started feeding these practical situations of the organization. That's when, and then kind of translating them, roughly speaking, into towards game mechanics. as I was saying, like you can move in the spectrum, but kind of in a kind of rough drafty way. That was kind of opening up. Okay, now we can change this, and I think this could be done sort of already. Like if we don't strictly tie ourselves to particular structure, like I think what in OBOK can feed into this, and it can also feed back to OBOK, but we can kind of use the larger palette of thinking, say, rights in general or things like this, and we would be already capable of taking an organization and analyzing it, just like in the case of Martin's like snippets frames from his organization, and you can also do it in the sense of like parts of an organization, like because like you could have like, okay, here's how we do decision, and like, okay, what's actually happening, like what is the rights of the members, and like that's good basic analysis. Is like often these are sort of the same. It's like, oh, you have a right to join this meeting, you have a right to speak, you have a right to propose something to vote, and then when something is voted, you have a right to vote on it, and then that becomes a protocol of, say, majority wins or something like this. But once you do that kind of rudimentary analysis, now you have modular pieces. Now you have things that you can move about, like, and this is why the rights are just a general good analytic tool as well. Like now you can think, okay, what happens if we take the right of proposal and think of putting some kind of template or pattern on it? Or maybe it already has one, but like just to change that. And what if we actually take the right to speak and have a discourse, but put like certain rules that don't control all of it, but maybe allow for kind of like playing around, how does the interaction take place? What if we think of some kind of other ways of doing that? Like what happens if you ask everyone do one proposal, at least one proposal each month, or like what kind of proposals does it create? What if you make the proposals available not just to this general whatever entity of decision making, but you can make proposals to anyone in the organization? And that becomes a recognized thing. You kind of can do it otherwise, but you'd say like, oh, you have the right to make proposals for this decision body or to anybody. And how does that change the organization? And that's an example. Now we are in these moving pieces, and now we're kind of adding, modifying pieces, and suddenly we're seeing the potential organization change. And you can go more detailed from there, but that already allows you to kind of speculate and design, draft design different possibilities. So yeah, I think we can do it already even for cases. And maybe that's something to think about. Like, I think it actually might be useful, just as kind of like a first impression, to maybe a mix, like creating a new organization / analyzing an existing one, is that you analyze existing ones or parts of ones or patterns of existing ones to think about variants and then think about what kind of organizations that can create. Because then through those variants, you're already kind of putting into practical use in this sense of what kind of tools you really want to have. Like, yes, these tools like OBOK might cover everything, but maybe you want certain things into these approaches to make them more useful, understandable, things like this.
One thing I believe, one thing I believe this approach reveals very effectively is the amount of information that flows between systems, right? Like when you think of voting as a game, you realize how little information is conveyed
Yeah,
in a vote,
yeah,
and how it's very blind, a very blind form of interaction. So I
yeah,
do like how, while it might seem that one is making organizations more complex or with more steps, it's always in the with the spirit of conveying more information and having more context to decide and to move forward.
yeah. Like actually thinking about that and kind of also introducing a little bit of like playing about into the situation. A couple of things that come to mind to your comment, like in terms of voting, like early on, this was in one session, but just to highlight it, I don't know if we used it actually. I mean, we didn't get that far. It was one of the mechanics I was drafting about. I was playing with um, I think it was from Lasers and Feelings. It has this spectrum. I think it's from 1 to 10, but then like it's like a dimension. It's like there's like polar opposites, or like the lasers and feelings are two ends of the spectrum, and if you're closer to one, you're high in lasers, and you're closer to 10, you're high in feelings. So you cannot have both. But then the idea was like if you set those spectrums, um, um, you can say that, okay, I'll just run it in a quick summary. Say somebody makes a proposal. Say we have a spectrum of structural and uh, holistic thinking, like, or analytic and holistic thinking. I'm kind of boring, but I'll just use something simple. So somebody who thinks in gestalts and large things, and versus something that is very much like this structure. Um, and yeah, somebody makes a proposal, and it's tagged by everybody as, okay, this is a structural analytic proposal. And because they make the proposal and they have, let's say, a score of 3 in analytic, which is like close, on like uh, it, that they have a like they're closer to the analytic. They then could have a vote that say starts from the middle, and people vote. It slides between these two ends, but because they have a high structural, it needs to reach less towards that end, because it only needs to reach their number, because they are kind of recognized as being analytical in this sense. I'm not saying that's for everything, but that's a kind of way to see, oh, this is actually a hack of a game mechanic, changing it, yes, a bit, but also like bringing a different kind of voting, which kind of addresses the issue of like how to introduce skill to proposals, um, uh, in a certain kind of way. So so that's certainly a kind of possibility to play around with that kind of direction. And I had another example, but I'll forget. Or maybe it comes to mind in a second. But that's an example of when you start to kind of incorporate these structures, how something like uh, voting could be different in nature. Like I don't know, is it useful, or which kind of organizations it would be useful, but it's already a mechanic, and then you can codify that mechanic, and it might get somebody's interest, because it's always a difficult question of like proposals versus who's making them, and there's no optimal solutions for that, but actually having some kind of solutions is, or some kind of structures is a useful thing in itself. um, We also don't have really sliding votes too much. Maybe so.
I'm smiling because I just read Pablo's um, way to express this. It's like quadratic feelings. And
The quadratic feelings and
Yeah.
the quadratic lasers. Yeah.
Oh, what was that?
Quadratic voting, it's just
Oh, I know
this.
that, but like
Yeah.
quadratic feelings.
I was just commenting on your description of the decision making with the lasers and feelings, and how
Oh,
the
yeah.
experience has like a sort of weight to it that you
Yeah.
express intensity as well in your vote.
Yeah, and the group sliding it is expressing intensity and can even potentially react to it. And so like it's an interesting playground, and that's like just a case, but then you can develop it like you can take other approaches. I had another approach in mind, but now I slipped out of my mind because I was kind of recalling the what was the lasers and feelings hacked into voting. Um, because it isn't voting, but it's dice throwing. And I was thinking, well, to turn it into an organization, it would be interesting to take something close to that dice mechanic and turn it into voting. And that was my approach to it. But yeah, like but in terms of like, I think we covered quite a bit about these cases, like that there's generally positive attitude, and then like we can always think about whether a case is a branch group, subgroup, whatever comes to this group. Balancing this out is really a case by case, situation by situation thing. And I think that's at least a good beginning for that. But then in terms of like having a little bit of like a plan for playtesting, I think actually, Jakub, sorry, Pablo, what you said is an interesting take in the light of that the kind of like analyzing an existing organization and then kind of or creating a new one, and then what I was talking about, kind of doing both things, or analyzing existing ones to create new directions, and then do it not necessarily for the whole organization, but for parts, like we're really almost doing now with the voting thing.
Yeah.
Uh, because whatever we do, if we transform things, more things into modularity, the better. Like generally, it just like makes things like, oh, we can look at voting as a mechanic and then replace it with this kind of thing, and it's uh, it's kind of almost slottable as a Lego piece. In many cases, straight, but sometimes with a little bit of hacking.
Yeah.
Uh,
I'm thinking if it's productive to maybe I mean because I believe this analyzing organizations this farming characteristic where you learn stuff that you become modules for this open
mm,
source approach to building blocks, to the Lego
mm,
blocks. If we analyze both organizations and games without
yes,
distinguish
yeah,
between them,
exactly, yeah, agreed, yeah.
this might reveal yeah, it's a subtle approach, but it might reveal these characteristics in a more pure way, or at least from our perspective.
Uh, Completely agreed. Yeah, that's a very good point, and I think an update already to the structure that you should not make that line, but you can take this example from an organization, this example from a game, and just look at what happens. Like earlier, I talked about this development of from Carcassonne to Isles of Skye, the board game, or both are board games, and how Isles of Skye did this token, uh, kind of a market, but market of its own kind, to like how do you get the tiles to build the map kind of thing, like, um, and then and how the market works and why it's kind of interesting in itself, like, and the like you can actually I think it's we never got to that point, but it would be kind of interesting to look at that also for organizations, because so another difference between Carcassonne. So do you know Carcassonne both, or
Just because you've mentioned it.
oh, uh, do you know it, Jakub?
Yeah, I played it a few times. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a sort of famous board game, but also kind of semi-pattern. Like people are always trying to make a new Carcassonne because it's very successful. So, but another difference, so Isle of Skye is considered as like a very successful, interesting further development on it, and it kind of does two main things. One of the interesting things is in Carcassonne, everybody's building the same map. In Isle of Skye, everybody's building their own kind of isles. Well, Isles of Skye, that's kind of where the name comes. And this is not to say one is better, but it actually creates two very different games. That the isles are part of a community, in a sense, yes, because they interact, but they are also kind of like your ability to build pieces is different when it's your own isle versus it's the common map that everybody's building. And sometimes one is better than the other. But then the Isle of Skye has this like, so rather than getting a random piece, or random two pieces and choosing, so in Carcassonne, it's one map, and then like you get two pieces, you choose one and play it. And that's how it goes round by round, if I remember correctly, but it's more or less that. And in Isle of Skye, rather, everybody gets to this market three pieces. And then they have tokens, which they earn by building the islands. And then they pre-bet to these tokens that they have. And those become thresholds that the others have to bet to or over. So I have this piece that I really want to keep. And I have decent amount of tokens, so I put 6 on it. And that becomes a threshold that you have to bid 6. You have to bid 6 if you really want to get it. But then, of course, the counter of that is that if you don't bet on it, I have to pay the 6. If I only put 3 and nobody bid for it, I get it for 3. And then, like after everybody has bid on their own pieces and set the thresholds, then you can make, I think, 1 or 2 bids for others' tokens, but you have to cross their threshold. Like, and that's essentially it. Like, you get the pieces that nobody bid, and you have bid, and you get the pieces that you have bid for from the others' palette, but you have to be able to pay for everything. That's how it works. Now, opening that like into a kind of interesting direction, like you can generalize a lot of that. You could make variations of that mechanic in itself. Like you could change the topic. Like what if it's like it's not land pieces, but it's topics of what's currently happening in the organization. Maybe you don't get them randomly, but you write them. Or you have to pick 2 from an existing pool of topics that everybody has kind of agreed upon, but you can make one yourself. You can write one. And then you bid on these topics that you have brought on the table, say there are 3, but then others can bid on them, and then it might not be that they get them, but they can join them. However, you kind of create the variant. And now you're kind of on your way to an interaction that is potentially interesting, but very much kind of based on the same mechanic. And once again, not for every case, but might be an interesting way of playing around with how do we kind of coordinate topics, how do we build communality, because you have to pick 2 from the existing list, but also individuality, because you can create 1. How do we kind of like see the motivation, and maybe this value is not even some kind of a token with fiat value, but it might be the token that you get in the organization. Might be a value token, but might be just the thing that is issued to every person in the organization, 2 tokens a week or 10 tokens a week, whatever it is. And all of these are different variants. Anyway, yeah, okay, that was the example. And it was a bit of a can of worms, but hopefully it's a sort of interesting example of this kind of direction and what it could be in terms of not separating games and organizations from the analysis.
Yeah. Even you've mentioned this before, and I am again reminded, I think I shared this last time, of this Georgism land tax system, which is
Yeah.
very similar, where people value their own property, but people can bid on them. So it sort of like, it's the same pattern, and it allows for decentralized market system, that free market without the state kind of situation. Yeah, so it's interesting that you can sort of identify these patterns, and in very different settings, right? So I also find a lot of value in this generalization that allows you to identify the patterns.
Yeah, that's, I think, one of the good skills that develops in game design, of course, in different amounts for different people. This was kind of, it's maybe one of my strengths. I like it, that it's because it's kind of in my style. Is this like, oh, that's the pattern, and now that I switch the land to topics, then I tailor it a bit to fit better to topics, and now we have this similar structure that is similar in a different context, kind of thing. But I wanted to mention in this, like, if we, so just as a possibility for the sort of planning for playtesting, if we take what Pablo you said, like that it's a sort of like, or kind of, we talked about like analyzing existing structures, not separating games and organizations in order to produce new structures, which are then potential building blocks for organizations, and find ways to express them, while keeping in mind that it's good to have some general game mechanics that all the examples fit to the same kind of, that they can interact essentially. And we have some basis in the kind of drafting OBOK, but we can kind of continue from that. That already sounds potential direction for testing. Like, so I wanted to put that on the table. Like, how does that sound as a kind of like at least an approach towards guiding testing?
That was a great summary. Yeah, totally.
Because I think it makes sense. Like, it seems that like that allows us to balance between analysis, real world cases or other cases versus now it's creation, and change that balance whenever needed. Like, now we made this interesting mechanic, let's concentrate on variance. Now we are kind of done with that, let's actually bring another case to analyze, or I have this interesting case to analyze, let's actually stop what we're doing and analyze that. Like, it allows this sort of switching depending on what's motivating and what's fertile given any moment.
Yeah, and I found really useful kind of now in overlaying those kind of layers, right? When you brought the Carcassonne example, which for me is very material and tangible because I still have kind of the lived experience of playing the game. So it's like really, yeah, it's not so cognitively demanding to actually, when you say move or threshold or so to really map it on something, but at the same time kind of taking the like Pablo mentioning the Georgian tax and that kind of trying to identify the similar pattern on phenomenon in different scales or contexts. And it reminded me immediately of Yanis Varoufakis, like the book The Other Now, I think, or Another Now, where he's actually describing this exact kind of market mechanism of this kind of self-bidding, taxing, and stuff like that. So yeah, I find it really rich for myself when those layers overlap, like the tangible related to the real world example, then to the game board example, which I have played and find familiar, and kind of putting those lens or those angles together, and then it becomes kind of alive for me. So I enjoy that.
I agree. And I think one of the additional strengths of it is that when you bring it to games, they are almost always things that you can break down in a Lego piece manner. Like, because like while not all game designs are modular, like they're very, very high on the kind of modular end of things. It's like, oh, this mechanic and that mechanic. And this is how they relate. There's this channel where this mechanic feeds that mechanic and that only, or these two, and they exchange this, and that's like you always kind of get that kind of for free on the game side, and then that allows you to think, oh, now we have like the potential to vary, and I think that's the strength of kind of keeping the game angle, is that it always brings things into, okay, now this is modifiable, now this is hackable, and this was one of my really early interest in kind of bringing organizations and games together. Once I started to notice that everything kind of overlapped, like when you go to the structural level, oh, actually that's that and that's that, and so on, because they're both designing interaction or coordinating interaction, and um, so bringing this game angle would bring this sort of designability into high, or kick it into high gear. But I think like for me, actually, that direction just put on the table, I like it, like on a first plus. Of course, like it's good to talk to uh, Martins and others, and Theas, and when they arrive, but I like but and it seemed that you both like it too, what I was hearing, and we could even take that as kind of starting point for next week. That is like, essentially, anybody could bring cases. I can also promise to bring some cases, game side, organization side. I don't know yet, maybe both. And then, and it, we can decide then, but it might be actually interesting to start from cases and modify, to have this sort of analysis, design, balance both present. So interesting cases of modifying, and they don't necessarily have to be, good cases. Like they can be like, oh, this is an area that is done in every organization, and it kind of has to be done, but it kind of sucks, or whatever, or they sucks from this angle now that one is looking organization as a game, or whatever it is. And then take like, oh, these are the mechanics, how could it be done differently, or here's a completely another way of doing the same thing but starting from a different angle, and so essentially, like bringing some of the cases onto the table from anybody and thinking about which ones to focus on, and kind of making it into mechanics.
Yeah, maybe it will be helpful to, I mean, I guess you've been doing this with the document, with the Google document, but finding a way to synthesize these modules into something that's more a wiki, or in the document itself, like not what you have right now in the document, but maybe specific things about organizations or games, right? Like when we realized this in Wonder Home, this token system was a mutual credit system.
Yes.
I guess that's like, okay, we realized this is a mutual credit system that acts this way. Then how to synthesize that into an actionable thing, right?
Yeah. I think you're right in this. Like the current document, or the kind of OBOK document, there were the other documents as well, but that one, it was kind of like, I wanted to write it that you could also see it, and wasn't so much yet like, oh, this is some kind of final presentation, and but I do think like also different things might have different documents, but it makes sense to have something that can easily slide into, okay, now this is recorded, because like you said, it should be good to have a place where you can put down the compatibility with mutual credit and the Wonder Home token mechanics, because it wasn't written down. Like I remember it now, but like it would be better if it's written down, and then somebody might continue from that. So maybe that's
Yes.
actually something practical to think for towards next week, is solutions towards that. I mean, do you say, Jakub?
Yeah, just a question again, like following up on Pablo's also, because it, if I understand correctly, Pablo, what you're speaking about is kind of capturing or recording perhaps also parts of what we deconstruct or the patterns that we analyze, and perhaps like the possible interconnections. And so my question was whether Peko or Pablo, whether you have or tried using some kind of, let's say, visual language, like, I don't know, flow diagrams or something that can actually distill it into a little bit more formal patterns which are like captured visually also, whether something like that might be useful, or whether you tried something like that.
I can say from my side that I combine constantly. This is one of the reasons why my favorite thing, medium to start with, is things like this. Is because I can slide between, I draw that as a hasty diagram, and then I write some notes on it, and then I move to make even more figural drawing, and kind of move between those. It's because like I often find it's like constantly mixes, like something is like a diagram, and of course it's useful to kind of think to put them in more clear forms and put this in an image of a diagram, or here's a diagram link from draw.io or wherever, and then here's some text on it, and like these kind of possibilities. But yeah, I combine constantly.
Yeah, I also diagram a lot. I like diagrams. I don't know how formal we want to go. Maybe it is useful to go extremely formal with some stuff, just to like distill it to its very essence. But sometimes it's not. I'm not sure. Like I don't know the how much of an effort it is to do so, and how much benefit we will get from that level of formalization. But maybe in some cases it's worth it. Maybe in some it's not.
Yeah, I guess, Pablo, just what comes to my mind related to the formality, I guess when we would be on the level of actually encoding or codifying some of the agreements or rules, like for example, playing with defining holochain, DNA, or validation rules, then it might be a kind of good bridge to have it already formal on the conceptual level. But yeah, I definitely agree that perhaps some of those concepts, it's not that beneficial to try to stick them into boxes and formalisms.
Yeah, but totally. Like for example, if we're thinking of analyzing, I don't know, the state, and citizenship under this realm, I do find a lot of value in being very formal about what does citizenship entail, right? In terms of rights and as a character, that would be very interesting.
Yeah, there is like a there are many these forms of formalisms. I mean, once again, one can use games. It's like for example, a character sheet is not a diagram, but it's very formal in the sense of like, here are your abilities, and in abilities you write this way, and here is this part where you write more freely, but here you write a bullet point list, and then you just, and so on and so on. Like there's all kinds of mixed formalisms going on, and some of them have diagrams, by the way, also as well, like here are your relations, and put them in tiers, and draw lines. So I think like that's I think this sort of like presence of formalism as a possibility is always kind of important, and like, and citizen might be, it's, here's a diagram, and here's a bullet point list of rights of that we see for it, and here is a description that helps to read the rights, and that's more like a paragraph, and it's all those forms together kind of thing. But I think like towards your idea of this sort of wiki-like thing, I think what would be good, like is to think what would be an easy way to start recording kind of these kind of things. You know, like the thought of like, hey, one should make a note on the mutual credit Wonderhome token structure connection, and then like, of course, it's better the more ready it is by itself, but it's a balancing act between what is easy to record and what is more final. Like, but I think if anybody has ideas on that, like, or comes up with ideas during the week, this could be like a short topic to revisit at the beginning of next week, is because I think it makes total sense. It opens. There are many ideas that actually probably nobody of us remembers now, because nobody remembers everything, that would have deserved such a place to be noted down, because they were potential directions of development. And not that everything has to develop, but it's good to have those up somewhere.
Yeah.
Um,
I have the feeling that choosing the specific formalism for different characteristics, it's a very, like, there's a lot of expressive potential in that. Like,
yeah,
I'm just thinking of this, the character sheet of a citizen, right? The
yeah,
character sheet of a refugee, and just
yeah,
how provocative that is to have it conveyed in that language, right?
yeah, definitely, yeah.
Whereas the Wonderhome token system could be formalized from an economic perspective, and
Yeah,
I feel that's what reveals the most about it, right? So these mixed formalisms make a lot of sense to me.
yeah, and actually, I think the Wonderhome as an economy, that's another point that should have been noted down. I have it in the back of my mind because when I was kind of analyzing it, I noted that it has some strengths, and one of the strengths is because you have this sort of easy definition of like this sort of bullet points of what kind of actions, patterns to be recognized earn you a token, and what kind of actions cost you a token. Um, Now, on a world scale, that might be hard, but on an organization scale, that's completely possible to think about those kind of things. And then creating those kind of as lists becomes a very capable organizational design tool. Is that, oh, we put these things because they are important, so they earn you a token. And these things are also important, but you should not be able to do this all the time, so therefore they cost it. That becomes a kind of coordinating, modulating factor there. And we have, that's actually maybe in 2 pages or whatever. And you have a thing that might be changed, maybe developed over time, whatever, but becomes a kind of factor in the organization itself. So there is an actual or an example of a potential from that kind of approach of tokens, which could be used. But yeah, but I think this sounds really good in the sense of that next time we could bring these cases, I can write about it. Now that we have this, I can write earlier. Like, and I promised to Martin, I'll try to keep to this promise that I pester our 2-factor authentication so that I can post the videos earlier. So I'll try to post it Sunday latest, and can write about this bringing of cases, and then secondly, we can think during the week of potential solutions for this, making records, and what platforms essentially, what would be easy to jot things down, and potentially think about what the format is. If somebody knows or is capable of easily implementing a wiki, there are some easier wikis. That's a possibility. But everybody can think about what are their capabilities and what is easy enough for them. That's something to think about, and that could be a start towards a sort of, or set the direction towards it, the future playtesting.
Nice. Sounds good.
And in the meanwhile, if there's some development, for example, Jakub in the digital side, like keep up, like you can post to people or generally to Telegram, whatever works in this case. Like keep and like if there is a need of session, just so just message and like it's I think it would be a good thing. Like I already have some thoughts. We can visit this later, but like in terms of this sort of what kind of things say you can look at in video games that are interesting in kind of organizational sense. It's early thoughts, but I was kind of scouring around, especially kind of small games that have like a very condensed interaction, whether they're old games or kind of newer indie games, like and what they could do with that. But they could be interesting material to analyze for potential for digital.
Great. So I can make a short description or like proposal of for the like kickoff meeting perhaps, and then perhaps put out some doodle. And I
Yeah.
would be happy for any inputs or like additions to the description. So
Yeah.
it reflects our intention, and then we could kick off some something.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Any last thoughts?
Exciting.
I think so as well.
Yeah, sounds good.
And thanks for you both also for being troopers. And I think it was a really good session. We had a good synchrony here, and also the actually Jonathan coming in was good. Like there was this. Axel has been following the progress on the videos. He's been saying that like I probably not every video, but that I surely understand. But like I can see because he makes comments that he's watched the video because like otherwise he wouldn't know. So that's positive, and like generally also in the EXA circles there is positivity towards whatever we're developing. I think it's a good balance that we have this sort of like it's really up to us to develop this direction, but there is like this interest that if something grows from there can be potential support from EXA as well.
Bit of an off-topic question, Pekko, do you by any chance have any materials from EXA around convex commons, which is a term I wasn't familiar with, but I heard it a few times, but I cannot find much about it.
I don't think the term. I think the term in itself was highlighted by. I'm forgetting names, but
I think it was Roberto, right? Roberto Saundi in the Ouroboros session.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, and this is more Robin Hood side, which is like a partner organization of EXA, like much of the same people, but also different people. And so yeah, it's Roberto. I can check if Roberto has put up something on Convex Commons. But yeah, you're right. I think it's more him that has brought the concept, and it also makes sense from Roberto's background. He has an investing background, that analysis of investment. So yeah, so
Thanks.
I can check from him like if he has more material.
Thanks.
All right. So yeah, with that, I will now also remember to stop the recording.